This is Talking Foreign Policy, a critical look at Canada's role abroad, and I am Eve Engler. Today we're going to talk about the foreign interference inquiry's final report that was dropped by Justice Marie-Josée Hogue on Tuesday. Basically, there's very little there. And in fact, I think that the main conclusion of this report is that it should prompt a call for an inquiry into the foreign forces that actually pushed for this foreign inquiry. In other words, the US aligned intelligence agencies and the Washington funded NGOs that have been pushing for this inquiry and have been hyping this notion of foreign interference, specifically the notion that China is some major threat in Canada. Not only is there not much in this report in terms of backing up claims of major foreign interference, but let's remember that the initial impetus, the initial Liberal Special Rapporteur on Foreign Interference, former Stephen Harper appointee as Governor General David Johnston, he actually poured cold water on CSIS's fear-mongering over Chinese interference and rejected the call for a public inquiry. And it was only because of the media working with a very partisan opposition that basically forced the government to hold this public inquiry. To discuss this matter, we have activist and lawyer Dimitri Lascaris, who was actually the legal counsel for the Iranian Canadian Congress at the foreign interference inquiry. So, first of all, Dimitri, thanks for coming on Talking Foreign Policy. And first of all, can you just kind of give us, sort of a bit of a summary of the report and your sort of reaction to the report?
Sure, Ethan. Thank you for having me on again. Let's just step back and start by acknowledging that this has been an obsession, this whole question of alleged foreign interference in Canadian politics for a couple of years now, if not much longer than that, in the Canadian corporate media and in the political elite and the punditry. I mean, we have been led to believe, if you took the press report seriously, that our democracy, so-called democracy, was under assault by malign actors, and particularly China and Russia, and to a lesser extent, Iran and India. And you'd think that given the amount of oxygen that this subject has sucked up in the political discourse, when there's so many pressing problems in this world, domestically and internationally, including, of course, a genocide that our government has been supporting in a variety of ways in Gaza, and an existentially dangerous war in Ukraine, you'd think that we would be devoting this kind of energy, attention, public money to this issue if, in fact, if it was only a serious threat. Well, this report has basically blown that theory out of the water. And I'm going to quote to you the key language, what I regard as the key language. The Justice Hogue said, although there are a very small number of isolated cases where foreign interference may have had, not did have, but may have had some impact on the outcome of a nomination contest or the result of an election in a given riding, there is no evidence, I repeat, to suggest, I'm quoting here, that our institutions have been seriously affected by such interference or that parliamentarians owe their successful election to foreign entities. While any attempted interference is troubling, I am reassured by the minimal impact such efforts have had to date. Nor have I seen any evidence, I repeat, any evidence of traitors in Parliament plotting with foreign states to act against Canada. Although a few cases involving things like attempts to curry favor with parliamentarians have come to light, the phenomenon remains marginal and largely ineffective. I am not aware of any federal legislation, regulations, or policies that have been enacted or repealed on account of foreign interference. While the state's attempts are troubling and there is some concerning conduct by parliamentarians, there is no cause for widespread alarm. Now, I regard this, Eve, as a raging indictment. You know, she's a judge. She's being polite throughout her report. She even, at some point, says, the media, I'm paraphrasing, the media went haywire here, but she excuses the media and she says, well, based on the limited information available to them, we can't really fault them for having done that. I think we can, because this was a nothing burger from the outset. The media should have been demanding hard, credible evidence from the outset, and there was never a point ever when any credible evidence was presented to the media. But nonetheless, what we have discovered is that this has been a colossal waste of time, energy, and public money.
Yeah, and today's Globe and Mail on the front page has the headline Hogue report underplays threats faced by diasporas, advocates say. And then the editorial board published a official editorial saying Hogue report keeps us in the dark. So the Globe and Mail is not giving up. Now they're after doing this with 2 years ago with David Johnson and former Governor General, they're not accepting the conclusions of very establishment people who look into this stuff seriously. Um,
Hey, may I just pause there? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the Globe and Mail, sure, it's putting out this kind of a statement because the Globe and Mail has been the primary perpetrator of this crap, and so they're embarrassed.
this
You
is a
know, but
damning
what do they
indictment.
what do they have to back up the claim? They have nothing to back up the claim. They're just putting out an editorial because they have been in the forefront of generating this hysteria.
Yeah. No, it's pretty remarkable to see. One of the things that you mentioned on social media, and we were talking just before. So there's nothing in this report that mentions one of the major foreign interferers in Canada, a secondary one. There's one. We'll get to the big elephant in the room, but that Israel's not mentioned. Even though we know 6 or 8 months ago, Haaretz reported on this major social media campaign, a couple $1 million by the Israeli diaspora ministry, I believe, to sort of sway U.S. and Canadian officials. We know that Canada's Jewish federations, which sponsor the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, they have formal ties to the Jewish Agency for Israel, which is a parastatal. So there's all kinds of ways in which we know that Israel is sort of interfering in Canadian affairs, but this report completely ignores that. Can you comment on the Israel angle to this?
Sure. So, and by the way, although I acted for the Iranian Canadian Congress, I just want to be clear that I am speaking on my own behalf here. They may or may not agree with everything that I say in this particular interview, but I'm not here as their counsel. So, in the course of representing them, they were interveners, so they didn't have the opportunity as interveners to give testimony under oath or to have their counsel cross-examine the witnesses who did give testimony under oath. But they were invited at various points, as were all the interveners, to make written submissions and to consult with, in one particular instance, Judge Hogue herself. And a point that was repeatedly brought up by my client in the course of its communications with the staff of the commission was that there was credible evidence that Israel was interfering in Canadian politics. And we specifically cited these reports, which came out during the inquiry in mainstream Western media. The New York Times, I believe, was one of them. Haaretz might have been another, about Israel engaging in this covert disinformation campaign in social media to try to generate Islamophobia in Canada. This is a very serious thing, for obvious reasons, to try to, justify what it's doing to the largely Muslim population of Palestinians in occupied Palestine, and to distract attention away from its heinous crimes and so forth. So this was put directly to them. The media reporting on this covert disinformation campaign designed to generate, hatred towards a particular religious group. I checked every single volume. I searched every single 7 of the 7 volumes for the word Israel after they were published a couple of days ago, and there is no mention of Israel whatsoever. None. So I would have said, and have been saying for years, there is actually a problem with foreign interference in this country, but it's not the one that the Globe and Mail and these other hacks in the corporate media are fixated upon. It's not China and Russia and Iran. It's Israel and particularly the United States. These are by far the biggest threats to Canadian democracy. We are seeing this now perhaps to a greater degree than we ever have with the Trump administration. We can get into that more if you'd like. But they studiously avoided the elephants in the room and focused all of their attention on threats which turned out to be completely immaterial, as the court herself found after an exhaustive, review, multi-million-dollar review of whatever evidence CSIS and these stakeholders were able to provide.
Yeah, that to me, I mean, the main issue here to me was that the foreign interference panic actually spoke to foreign interference. In other words, the U.S. empire wants Canada to target China, and the best way to whip up an anti-China kind of hysteria is to say that China is in fact controlling our affairs and interfering in Canada and frame it all as defensive. And so that to me has been clear for multiple years. The main ways in which that played out was, of course, CSIS, which is very close to its US counterparts, by them being the main force of sort of hyping all this stuff. But the other thing was groups that are American funded. People like Marcus Kolga at the Disinformation Watch, which was set up, Macdonald-Laurier Institute, set up with funding from the US government. The Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project, Metmi Toti, who has quoted endlessly, he was quoted again today, front page of the Globe and Mail, endlessly about alleged Chinese interference. Toti's been getting US money for years and years, probably decades, I think now. And so that to me was the real foreign interference. You sent in a document that you sent from the inquiry, they do mention, says the commission heard in particular that the United States is treated differently than other states that have acted in Canada. One written submission asserted that the United States is the biggest foreign interference threat to Canada. Another question whether there be inquiry into Israeli and American government interference, stating that there should be if all Canadians and communities are to be treated equally. So yeah, can you talk a little bit about, I guess, the U.S. angle, but then maybe also, which you kind of cited a bit, but this is taken on an obviously greater import in the context of Donald Trump, the U.S. president, talking about annexing Canada.
Yeah, that language that you just quoted from the commission staff's summary of written submissions that they heard in private consultations. I'm virtually certain that they're referring to my client's submission because we said that the United States is treated differently and that it is the biggest foreign interference threat in Canada. And based on what I saw in the proceedings of the commission, no one else was making that pitch. And we specifically said uh, in support of that submission, there are very influential think tanks in this country, like the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. We specifically mentioned the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, which appear to be taking substantial sums of money from the US government directly and indirectly. They don't disclose that, despite efforts on the part of some persons to get at the basis of their funding. And they're going around promoting an agenda and having an impact on Canadian policies, actual government policies, that is very much to the liking of the United States government. For example, our attitude towards China and Russia, which you mentioned, our attitude towards military spending. The Macdonald-Laurier Institute is constantly harping on about the need for Canada to spend more money on its military, which is already stratospherically high. That's exactly, of course, what the U.S. government wants us to do. And it's not just Trump. The Biden administration was pushing hard for us to buy these F-35s, which with life cycle costs are going to amount to about $74 billion, a huge sum of money for Canada. So there is a lot of covert interference happening from the U.S. government through, and this is just one of the ways they do it, the think tankocracy in this country. And again, I haven't read the reports in their entirety. The most recent report, it's 7 volumes. I'm trying to work my way through it now, but I've seen no indication whatsoever that the commission looked at this in any serious way. They got the submission. They heard our concerns, but they just weren't interested in looking into this.
And this is mostly sort of operating kind of a bit of at a general level, but we do know it has the foreign interference panic has led to actual legislation, right? In the I guess it's probably about 7 or 8 months ago now, Bill C-70, an act countering foreign interference, was actually passed. That's a fairly draconian kind of legislation. So there's not just sort of like, okay, it's taking up too much space in the dominant media, and it's kind of whipping up a anti-Chinese, anti-Russian kind of political climate, but it's actually got right into legislation. And we should also note that this act was passed with unanimity. There was like rushed through House of Commons and passed with unanimity. Can you sort of maybe talk a little bit about that, and where do you think this sort of foreign interference kind of panic stuff is, where that's going?
Yeah, I wrote a long piece on my website about Bill C-70. It is truly a draconian piece of legislation. Basically, it uh, subjects people to very long prison sentences, life imprisonment, for potentially up to life imprisonment, if they do things like, cause, the government, they cause somebody to do something that is aligned with or associated with the agenda of a foreign entity by means of something called intimidation. The legislation doesn't, identify what it means, doesn't define what it means by intimidation. So let's give an example of what that might mean. Okay, we hear constantly from Zionist students on university campuses in this country that when they see things like pro-Palestine encampments or students on their campuses wearing the keffiyeh or chanting the word intifada or saying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, they're intimidated. They say, we are intimidated. Um, so one might very well mount an argument that because there's a constituency on university campuses that is experiencing quote unquote intimidation, and the people who are making these statements, they seem to be aligned with, the agenda of Palestinian resistance groups, to bring an end to the occupation. Therefore, they're violating Bill C-70. You could easily see that argument being made. At the end of the day, I don't know whether a judge would buy it, but is the language of the legislation broad enough to capture that sort of thing? Absolutely. There was another instance in which, and I'm sure you're aware, Yves, where some peaceful protesters learned where Melanie Joly's house is situated in Montreal during this heinous genocide, and they went and they camped out in front of her house, and they were demanding that her government take action to stop the genocide rather than support it. There was an explosion of controversy around this. Even, the foreign affairs critic of the NDP, Heather McPherson, denounced the protesters, saying you're intimidating politicians, and we can't abide this kind of conduct. There was nothing violent whatsoever about what they did. How dare you go near the house of a politician? Even though the cause of this protest was a genocide, the worst thing that a person could possibly do. So again, you can easily see a situation, particularly if you get a government like that of Pierre Poilievre, which is going to be very aggressive in suppressing, even more so than the Trudeau government, suppressing pro-Palestine activism. You can easily see them saying, you know what, you are violating this particular provision of Bill C-70. We're going to prosecute you. We're going to seek to imprison you because you camped out in front of a politician's house, or you use the words from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free on a university campus, and you cause some Zionist students to be intimidated. This is scary legislation. And this legislation, Eve, I have no doubt, was in large part a product of pressure being applied by the United States government. The United States government wants to see this sort of thing shut down throughout the West. In fact, as we now see, the Trump administration is deporting students, people in the country who are there on a visa and whom it deems to be sympathetic to the resistance groups in Palestine. I think that there is in fact legislation being passed in this country as a result of foreign interference. That legislation is the result of U.S. foreign interference. And Bill C-70 is an excellent example of that.
Well, maybe now that the Foreign Interference Commission has said there is not much proof of the question, maybe now they'll revoke Bill C-70, and I wouldn't hold my breath on that one. But thanks a lot for coming on talking foreign policy, Dimitri.
Thank you, Eve. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, everyone.